Hi, welcome to another installment of Opening the Writer's Desk, where we take a deep dive into the writing tips from today's most widely read authors. In today's episode, I'm going to share 4 writing tips from J.K. Rowling. You may have heard of her. Because someone out there hasn't, I'm just going to say it. Harry Potter, that's her. Okay, so here's what J.K. Rowling says she does to produce her best work. Let's go. Okay, if you ever feel stuck writing, you're not alone. It happens to us all, at least it happens to me fairly often. But when I feel stumped, I often like to look to other writers I admire because figuring out what's worked for them can really help me get inspired. J.K. Rowling is, of course, a titan of contemporary literature. She's the author and creator of the Harry Potter franchise. But she started just like any of us, writing the first Harry Potter book in a cafe in Edinburgh. So how did she go from a cafe writer to one of the most popular authors of all time? Today, we're going to explore that question. Tip number 1 from J.K. Rowling is to write whenever you can find the time. One of the problems I hear most frequently from aspiring authors that I talk to is the time problem. They say they want to write their book, but they just don't have the time. And it's true, finding the time to write a book, it can be a big task, especially when most of us have jobs or our parents or both, have 100 responsibilities. But as Rowling says, sometimes you have to get your writing done in spare moments here and there. That's a direct quote. As much as we wish there were hours and hours in the day, there's no wand we can wave to free up all the time we want. You may only have a few pockets of 15 minutes or 30 minutes here and there to devote to writing, and that's okay. You can still get it done. Liz, my colleague, who's also a writer, wrote her book in her van while waiting at her kids' sports practices. This is the beauty of writing in a notebook, by the way. You can take it with you wherever you go. And when she finished, she told me she was more proud of herself for making it happen because she knew how much it had taken. She had learned what she was capable of because she made it happen sitting in, carpool lines in her van. Sure, of course, it still would have been a great accomplishment and very cool if she had written her novel sitting at her desk with 10 hours every day. But that wasn't the case. She wrote it in her car in 15 or 30-minute increments, and that was a part she took a lot of pride in. Not only did she write her book, but she learned her own strength. And I love that story. I love all stories like these. Pushpa, a doctor, just finished her novel on the Notes app of her phone while working at a massive hospital during a pandemic. She just wrote it on the Notes app between seeing patients. Kate just finished her novel while homeschooling her kids in a pandemic. These people's stories inspire me so much because when they tell me that they have finished, I can see and hear how deservedly proud they are of themselves. And these people are not superhuman. They aren't exceptions. They aren't burnt out. They seem invigorated. They're replenished. They've acknowledged their true deep desire to write their book, and they've invested the time to make that happen. And I think that kind of decision and carving out time to write often doesn't lead to burnout. It leads to feeling more alive than you felt in a long time. Here's the truth, it never is gonna feel like the right time to write your book, which may sound sad and hopeless, but I actually think it's the opposite. I think it just means you get to decide when it's the right time, and only you can decide when it's time to write this thing. So you wanna get your writing done when you can, and maybe that means you bring a notebook with you, on your bus on a commute, or you write after you put your kids to sleep. Are you ever gonna have 24 hours in a day to dedicate just to writing? Probably not, but often you can find the time, just like J.K. Rowling did. Tip number 2 from J.K. Rowling is to plan to revise a lot. Get this, J.K. Rowling rewrote Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the first book in her series, multiple times before she started looking for a publisher. And she says that she rewrote only the opening chapter 15 times. That's a lot of revision. But also, I get it, because I've done that too. I actually often rewrite my openings a lot more than I rewrite the other parts of my draft, partly because openings are so important to hook the reader, and partly because it's a lot easier to figure out what the beginning of your book should be once you've written the end. I'm not saying you're going to have to rewrite your book 15 times before you get a book deal. No, I'm not saying that. But the truth is that the first draft is just one version of the story you're trying to tell. And you're gonna find discoveries along the way that are gonna prompt you to make changes to that story. to make it the strongest version of that story. When we as an audience read a published book, we're reading a version of that story that has undergone many versions of itself already. We're seeing the result of rounds and rounds of work. My favorite writer, George Saunders, says that the thing that separates writers who publish from writers who don't is a willingness to revise. That's the thing. I once shared with a writer some ideas for revision of his novel. He had written one draft, a first draft. There was a lot that was working in the draft, but there was also work that it needed. And when I shared with him my notes, he said, well, I guess the work never ends, does it? And it struck me as a bit funny, honestly, because he had only written one draft. So, no, you're not done yet, dude. But also, he was kind of right. The work isn't really ever done. You know, that's why we have to make sure we like it, because it goes on a very, very long time. All the more reason to make sure you're having fun while you're doing it. And this is why I try to help the writers I work with find a process and a writing cadence that's joyful and enriching for them and not draining and painful. All right, tip number 3 from J.K. Rowling, sometimes less is more. When Rowling wrote the first draft of The Philosopher's Stone, she apparently realized that she'd given away too much information about her characters and their world in the first book when she knew she was going to write a series. So she rewrote it, and this time she held back more information than she had the first time. You don't want to overwhelm your reader with, all the information all at once. Yes, backstory is important. By backstory, I mean things like, how did this character end up here? Why is he so triggered by this event that's happening right now? What is he afraid of and why? Backstory is how we learn who the characters are and what drives them. And that is what makes us care about them. But backstory also, feels like backstory. It feels sort of dated because it's literally, by definition, in the past. It happened before the present world that we're reading about. And that means if we dump too much of it all at once, particularly at the beginning of our story, it can really drag the story down. So what's the takeaway here? You don't have to be writing a series like J.K. Rowling to learn a lesson. Give your readers enough information so that they know what's going on in a given moment and care about that character. But don't feel like you have to share everything up front or too early. You can drip it out. And I really like that image of dripping. Drip it out, don't dump it out. This isn't the ice bucket challenge, if you remember that from 2014. And if you don't worry about it. Okay, I have one more tip from J.K. Rowling to share with you, but before I do, I just want to invite you to apply to my program, the Book Incubator. The link is down below this video. It's only 2 questions. It takes less than 5 minutes. And if you're writing a book or want to write a book, you definitely want to check it out. Okay, back to the video. Our last tip from J.K. Rowling is to write the story you want to write, not the story you think other people want you to write. Here's a great quote from J.K. Rowling. What you write becomes who you are, so make sure you love what you write. I really like this quote. When you set out to write a book, you're going to be spending a lot of time, usually at least a few months for the first draft, with your characters and in the world that you're creating. You're not going to find the motivation to spend these fleeting hours of your life between work and your kids or whatever responsibilities you have going on if you're not passionate about the story you're telling. And I think that's a huge reason that the Harry Potter series has resonated with so many readers of all ages. You can feel the love that Rowling has for this world that she's created, and that love carried her as the author through 7 books worth of these characters' journeys. When you write the story you want to write, your love for the world you're creating will show through too on the page. If you've made it this far in the video, I'm guessing that you're writing a book or want to write a book. And if so, I would love to hear from you. When I'm not writing, my mission in life is to help writers write their dream books. I love it, I live for it. If you're curious to know more, I have a free video walking you through my exact process for writing a novel. You can get it by clicking below and answering just 2 questions to apply to my program, the Book Incubator. And you can get the video whether you join or not. There's not pressure to enroll. So just click below to tell me a little bit about you and your book or your book idea. I'm so excited to hear from you.